All right. Hello, my friends. This is Missy. I am here today with this new show that I call Circle of Friends. I'm trying to widen the circle, be inclusive, and have bigger, richer conversations. And today I have the lovely Evvie, this beautiful soul, this beautiful healer. Evvie, thank you for being here. Please enlighten us with who you are and what you do.
Hi, I'm Evvie Ormon, and I am the director of Emergent Phoenix. And my pronouns are they, them. And I am a healer and I'm an herbalist and a coach, a transformation, spiritual life coach. And I'm also, hold a list of different identities, which we'll get into and in our conversation. But I'm really excited to just be here sharing space and talking about Black liberation.
Nice. Thank you so much. Yes, I just recently met Evvie, and they have opened up a huge new world for me. So I am learning in each and every moment. And I've already apologized because I know I feel so ignorant and I will mess things up. But that's why Evvie is here to really teach us about this stuff. So I would like to know more about, let's start with the intersection of all these things, because as a person, we're not just one thing. We're so much more than that, even on the physical side and in the unseen side. So please tell me, what is your perspective coming from that wholeness?
Yeah, I like so some background on me. I spent the last 4 years living in Seattle, and now I'm back on the East Coast. And one thing that I've just noticed is just the way that we introduce ourselves is different on the coast. And that, like in Seattle, one of the things that was really common is to introduce ourselves with like our names, our pronouns, maybe to share like a little bit of our ancestry, like where we come from, and so I might say, like, I'm Evvie, my pronouns are they, them. I come from the peoples who worked the land, indigenous African peoples who worked the land in North Carolina. And that is where I claim as my ancestral homeland. And I also might share something called access needs, which are like a way to just at the very beginning to share with the people in the circle what are my needs to be able to show up fully and be able to fully participate. And so, for example, like if we were on a video, I might say like one of my access needs is subtitles so that I can follow the conversation. And or I might say I might ask you to repeat something because I might not catch it the first time because I am neurodivergent and I have ADHD and I live with autism. And so that means that my brain is processing information in a different way. And so I might need it to be repeated multiple times. And so that's something that I learned in Seattle, in my 30s. I didn't know about that before, but I found it so welcoming because there were times when I would be in a space with folks and not be sure whether I would have the access that I need. And I loved the concept of just like everyone. So you're not singling out anybody, of everyone sharing like, what do you need to have access to that space? Because we are whole organisms. Like I like to say, I talk about, I'm queer, I'm Black, I identify as Black Indigenous, I am neurodivergent. And all of these words are like things people are like, what do those words mean? And we can get into what they mean. But the thing to remember is just that these are not compartments of my life. That it's just like, this is my being, my whole being right here. And all of those things are living in this organism that I am walking around in. So that was just like the introduction for me is so powerful because it acknowledges the many aspects of ourselves that we come into a room and we're more than just our name. We are bringing our ancestors. We are bringing our past experiences. We're bringing our complex identities into the room and like sharing that so that we are showing up with our whole, full embodied self in a space.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Ooh, yeah, power. Feel that. That's great. So, okay, so tell me, what does diagnosis mean? Like, how does it affect if you were diagnosed young, teenager, older, adult? Like, how does that play into the way people deal with their mental health?
Yeah. So first I'll make a distinction between, so I talk about neurodivergence, and neurodivergence is kind of the counter to, and we talked a little bit earlier about, I did a video on this, like a kind of a short video, but neurodivergence is a term. So neuro means brain and nervous system, and then divergent just means different. And so it is in contrast to neurotypical, which is a word that is used to describe what science and Western medicine says is like describes as normal. And I like to make a difference between like neurodivergence and mental illness, because while neurodivergence does, like, there are people who claim neurodivergence, rightfully so, who live with mental illness, there are also people who claim neurodivergence who don't. So like autism is not a mental illness. I don't see ADHD as a mental illness. And when I'm mostly talking about neurodivergence, that's not what I'm talking about. But I also like live with depression and anxiety, and those things are considered, like would consider those mental illnesses. Like they're not the ideal state to be, living in. Whereas when I think of my autism or think of my ADHD, I'm like, my brain just works different, and that's great. And I actually love the way my brain works in those ways. So I want to make a little bit of a distinction there. But I also, one of the things that I like to start out with is just talking about what does the word normal mean, because that's what ultimately, like when we talk about mental illness and like diagnoses and those sorts of things, it's all in contrast to what is considered normal. And our concept of normal is very colonized and skewed based on the people who told us what normal is. So yeah, that's where I like to start, is just like, let's talk about what is normal. So.
Even just metaphysically, like when I started diving deeper into metaphysics and spirituality, I changed my language a little bit, because I realized when I was talking to my classes and explaining how maybe they were moving or how they were feeling, I said, oh, don't worry, that's normal. And then I was like, no, I don't want to use that word normal. What is normal? And so for something that I noticed occurs for people, over time, you see it in a bunch of different people, I just decided that was natural. Like, just happen. That's the word that I've been choosing to use rather than normal.
Yes, I love that. I love that reframe as natural. Yeah, because the truth is, so I'm gonna get back to normal in just a second, but there is this idea that there is a kind of a universal human experience that is like the normal experience that most people have, and the messaging, like the people who are sharing what is considered the universal experience, and then saying like everything outside of that universal experience is different or neurodivergent or is mental illness, are mostly like middle class white men. And when we look at the demographics of the world that we're living in, because it's like the humans are there's like 7.4 billion of us. There's a lot of people on the earth. And middle class white men are like not most of the people. 88, just from basic statistics, 88.8 or 88.5% of the world are people of color. So that's not even considering like what percentage of the people are like female, non-binary, trans, you know, all the variety of genders that there are. That's not thinking about, you know, ethnicity, which is something that goes beyond like race, which is kind of just like based what you look like, but like ethnicity goes more into like your culture and like your indigeneity and like where your people came from and like language and that sort of stuff. So, I mean, that's a very narrow, just from the way the scientific method requires there to be diverse samples for it to be something that's considered true or like a fact after it has been tested over and over again. If your sample is like, you know, 4% of the human population, and then you're like, this is what normal is, then at that point, we have to stand back and think like, okay, so whatever we've been told is normal is probably not normal. That's actually probably not most people's experience. But I love your reframing of it as it's natural, because what we see in the natural world is something called biodiversity. And biodiversity is basically the experience of different species having lots of different characteristics that are even different from each other within their species, so that the species can persist as the environment changes, because change is constant. Like, I love Octavia Butler and her writings, and one of the things she says is, the only lasting truth is change. God is change. And it's like, I actually have that like a tattoo on my because I'm like, I want to remember this every day. Like, change is constant, everything is always changing, and we have to adapt. And biodiversity is part of how our species has adapted. That's how we got different skin colors, because people migrated to different parts of the world and our bodies adapted to the environments that we're in. And so wouldn't it make sense that our brains would do something similar when we're in different environments, that our brains would shift and change to be able to better navigate the environment that we're in? And so I think of neurodivergence, and even in some respects, like some aspects of mental illness, as biodiversity, as like our bodies and brains adapting to the environments that we're in to make us better suited to navigate those environments. And so this is not about something like, you know, being different as something that's bad or that's pathological, like something's wrong, something's broken. It's just like, in order for our species to continue, we have to have biodiversity. And that is actually the thing that we could be celebrating. Yeah.
I love diversity. So yes, biodiversity explains that perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of goes with the bell curve you were talking about, right? This, well, I am calling like an illusion of normal, right? But could you explain that now? I saw you had a really nice graph on your Instagram video.
Yeah, and we can, I mean, that's something that we can you know, insert. But so what in statistics, there's something called a normal curve. So like if you take in statistics, or you've seen anything like a graph where there are like lines going up and down, and then, you know, horizontal and vertical, and then you plot the different points on a graph. So like in Western medicine, what scientists did is like they basically like gathered themselves together, they gathered their friends and their communities, which were very homogenous, and they were like, this is where most people's experience lies, and they would just like plot it on a path, like maybe the amount of time that a person can pay attention without losing focus, or the amount of time that a person can sit still without feeling like they need to move, or the amount of words that a person can read without getting distracted, and like plot all those things. And so when you start plotting all of the dots on the graph, they found something called like a normal curve. And so what that means is that most of the dots kind of collected in a certain area, and when they drew a line, it came out as a curve that kind of came up like this and then went back down. And so that group in the middle is what they call normal, and that curve is called the normal bell curve.
And outliers. I remember that term. I took statistics.
Yes.
There's the outliers on the outside,
Like,
right?
yes, we were reviewing statistics. I love it. So yeah, so and most recently, I've seen this used in the PSAs about coronavirus and like flatten the curve. And if you saw the curve, like that's what you were seeing was a normal bell curve. And what they were saying is like the normal bell curve was, the concern was it going up and being a steep curve, and what they wanted was for it to be more of a gentle slope. And so when scientists looked at the brain and they were plotting those things, what they basically said is like, this is where most people fall, and then anything outside of this normal bell curve we're going to call divergent. And that's just like a term that just means different. It means like it's outside of what is expected, because what's typical is like what's kind of in that middle part. And so that is what it means when we talk about neurodivergence. It just means that if someone were to plot, for example, my experience as someone who lives with severe ADHD, and what I was told, it's funny now. At the time, it didn't feel quite as funny, but I had a conversation. So I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was 7 years old. And back then, it was just based on observation. There weren't really tests that doctors could do. But now, with more technology, they actually have like tests you could do on a computer where they put a ball on your head and they have you look at a screen and they're like, okay, here are some tasks. And they will measure that with the ball. There's a camera that's focused on it, and it measures how frequently you look away from the screen. And so they did it on people who are neurotypical, and they're like, okay, well, they don't look away from, this is how frequently they look away from the screen, or this is how long it takes for them to respond to whatever task is on the screen. And then for people who are neurodivergent, who are falling outside of, where I saw the graph where most of the dots fall, they will tell you like where you are as far as where other people who've taken that test are. And I was told I was in the 99th percentile of people who have taken the test for ADHD. And when I heard that, I didn't know what that meant. So I was like, what does that mean? 99th percentile, I've been out of college 10 years. Statistics was a long time ago. So I was like, what does that mean? And my psychiatrist said, well, it means you did worse than 99% of people who took this test. So he basically was saying this is very severe, even in the realm of people who have ADHD, which I now hold as a banner of pride. I'm like, I'm in the 99th percentile, and so there's that, and then there's the autism spectrum, which is way more complex, I feel like, to explain, and so I'm not going to get super deep into that, but the autism spectrum is another way that people measure. Mostly with the autism spectrum, it has to do with things like reading social cues, being able to look at someone's face or body language and know what emotions they're feeling or what they mean, being able to read between the lines of what people say, and also the experience of stimulus. So how you experience, for example, the temperature of the air or the brightness of light or sound, and how that measures up against the typical experience. So there's those two diagnoses that I'm really familiar with, because those are the ones that I hold. The autism diagnosis I didn't receive till I was an adult, but the ADHD diagnosis I received when I was very young, when I was in second grade. And now I don't see those things as something that are wrong with me, but just the ways that my brain is different. And there are a lot of folks in my family who live with autism and ADHD, and so in that sense, I have a community of folks that we're similar, you know, in my family. But on the larger scale, I just don't see the representation as far as autism in particular, and also ADHD as like an adult experience that like kids who have, like we hear a lot about children with autism and parents who are parenting children with autism, but not what is it like kids grow up. We don't stay children forever, you know, and so what is that experience of being an adult who's living with neurodivergence? I feel like I went off a little bit.
No, you're right on target. And I appreciate that. What I really appreciate is, well, you living your truth, right? And sharing your truth and being an advocate for others who share a similar experience. But what I love is that you have used this, you are empowered. Like, this is your superpowers. This diversity makes you, I don't want to be judgmental. I don't believe anybody's better than anybody else, but, you know, us all being beautiful children of the Most High, like, we're all perfect in our own way, but it is something that has elevated you, that actually is beautiful, and you are empowered and not playing a victim role of, oh, I have this, so I'm that. Oh, I have this, you know. So I think education is very important, because still I feel like us how would you say, neurotypical, thank you.
Yeah.
Woo, I'm still learning. Like, neurotypical people can still be of service to educate ourselves and still provide a safe space for all people, right? Especially neurodivergent people. So
Yeah, and like the thing is, like, we're all, you know, at the beautiful thing about biodiversity is that there are different skills that we need as a species to be able to persist and survive. And especially in today's day and age, where like we've created all these complex systems that people need to navigate just to be able to like get food, for example. Like, think of all the steps that is involved in like getting food from like the ground onto your plate, you know, and there's a whole range of things that are involved in that. And that's just like one aspect of our lives. And so navigating all of these systems is really complicated. And we do need people with different skills. Like, you know, one of the things that I learned about ADHD is that people think of ADHD as like you can't pay attention, or like you can't sit still, or like you're hyperactive. And that is really true for a lot of people. But the flip side of ADHD is that you have this superpower. If something is interesting, you can hyper focus on it. There are times when I have sat down and wrote like some of the best stuff I've ever written, and I just like sat down and focused on it for 24 hours straight, and I was just like, no interruptions. Like, maybe I was drinking water, people maybe had to interrupt me, be like, you need to eat, you know, but I was just like zoned in. And my brain can do that when it's something that I'm really interested and passionate about. The flip side of that is that if it's boring, then I can't pay attention, because it's just like my brain is like, this is not what I want to spend my energy on. And so I can honor that by seeking out things, like honoring the desires, like seeing my desire as something that's sacred and something that is a gift to the world. Like, if there's a desire that I have, that means that there's something in the world that needs that medicine. And so my ability to hyper focus is a gift to be able to like accelerate change in a way that a neurotypical person may not, because they might get tired before they could finish that task. Meanwhile, there's some stuff that needs to get done in this world. Like my sister, I'm gonna call her out, and she might see this, and you know, hopefully she doesn't get offended, but she works in finance, and every time I hear that, it just like, I immediately feel bored. And but I'm just like, you know what? Godspeed to you on your journey in that, because somebody needs to be able to manage finance. We live in capitalism, and I'm not interested in that. Like, I wouldn't be able to focus. I wouldn't be able to do it. But it's necessary, right? Like, we need budgets. We need to be able to like manage finances for businesses, for our homes, you know, so that we can live sustainable lives. And so we complement each other in that way. And so if we can start to see ourselves as like interdependent, and that biodiversity really creates this beautiful like tapestry of humanity where we each have different skills and different abilities and different desires, and if we're all honoring them, then we can create this beautiful world that we all want to live in. Then that is where I see the power of like the idea of like biodiversity that we see in the natural world surrounding us. If we can like pull that into humanity and be like, we also are part of nature. We're also natural beings. We are biodiverse. Being the same should not be the goal. That is what, like, species that don't adapt go extinct. And I don't think that's what humans are wanting for ourselves. And so in order for us to be able to adapt and change to the changing world around us, we have to be able to embrace the ways that we are biodiverse, the ways that our brains work different, the ways that we look different, the ways that our bodies work in different ways. Yeah, so I feel really like that feels so alive and like strong in me, like that message of like biodiversity as like the part of the power of being a human being.
I love that. Yes, yes. And I, people who follow me, they know this. I believe in one power, one presence, this infinite creative source energy. You guys can call it God, you can call it cosmic consciousness, whatever you want to call it. It's nature is to expand, right? This is an infinite universe. I mean, we're always expanding. So if we are that little piece of the universe, it's no wonder that we're growing and expanding. It's no wonder that we're constantly changing, because that is the nature of all things. And
Yeah.
so to me, like you said, it's not the ideal to stay the same. You won't evolve, you won't survive. And so I just love that idea of biodiversity, and that we're changing and we're growing all the time. And it is a positive thing. It's an empowering thing. And so I'm really excited to hear more about your work and everything you're doing. But today, I think this was a wonderful, wonderful start. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, I guess I do want to just share that like part of the reason that I'm excited about this conversation is because I think in the times that we're living, we're seeing that there are systems and practices and ways that we have been showing up in the world, either for each other and within systems, in our relationships, that are not working, where there are people who are getting left behind, there are people who are dying, there are people who are suffering, and we are an intelligent species, and I really do believe in communal wisdom, and that we have within us, like already within the people here, like we have the answers to these problems that we're seeing that feel like we cannot overcome them. And I just think like, okay, there's like 7 billion of us on this earth, you know, everyone has some wisdom in them. If we are communicating and talking to each other, kind of like how we're talking today, and having these conversations, learning from each other, and also recognizing that difference is required. It's not even like, difference is beautiful, difference is like wonderful, but it's like it's also not optional. Like we need it in order to persist, or we will go extinct. And I feel like we're in this critical moment in our humanity now where a lot of people are recognizing like what we're doing is not working. We have to try some other things. And that is where like our biodiversity and this creativity and the growth and expansion that you're talking about really comes into play, and like leaning into that and not being fearful of change, because as mammals, like we like routine. That's something that is comfortable for us, and so it makes sense that like change would scare people. And ultimately we have to be able to get beyond that so that we can keep living as a species, and especially so that we can stop harming each other and stop harming our planet and stop harming other species. And so that is, I guess in a way to like wrap this up and like to give something to think about, and is to think about like how, in what ways in our lives, um, even, in the next 24 hours, can we be like pay attention to difference, pay attention to biodiversity, and lean into it with curiosity, and lean into those desires with creativity, so that we can heal our world and heal ourselves and heal each other. Because I really do feel like all of those things are connected.
Yes, thank you for offering that to us. I am already looking at the world different, and it's no mistake that I ran into a woman today at Yoga Works who basically told me she does a lot of research, and she's basically not an intuitive healer, a medical intuitive.
Mm.
Okay, so she can see things and know things, and she helps people. But she was like, everybody's on the spectrum. Like everybody has that diversity. Something's
Mm-hmm.
going on, whether it is autism, ADHD, dyslexia. It's like you said, we're all adapting and growing and changing. And so my my thing to you guys watching is, don't think that you know what someone's going through or what's in them, and don't think that you're different, or our difference is our unity. I think is how we can unite in our differences. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I got diagnosed with autism in my 30s. So like there are people who are watching this who might be neurodivergent and not realize it. And so if some of this is like resonating with you, you're like, yeah, this is my experience. Like I could not sit still for 7 hours in a classroom. And boring, if something is boring, I can't pay attention to, if you're hearing things, like look more into it, and embrace that, and don't be afraid of that as like something that's wrong with you, but really imagine like that this could be you discovering something that is a gift.
Right. And don't be afraid to reach out.
Mm-hmm.
Evvie is a coach. Evvie is an advocate. So go and follow her on Instagram. What's your Instagram handle?
It is at Emergent Phoenix and them. So you can follow me. Yeah, no, we're learning, and so yeah, my business is Emergent Phoenix, and so my website is www.emergentphoenixrising.com, and then my Instagram, where I do show videos talking about neurodivergence, trying to turn up those once a week, is at emergent_Phoenix.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for your patience with me and my learning curve. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Yeah, thank you. And
Yeah, thank you
so,
for having me.
we'll do this again. And that's it, my friends. Join us next time and bring a friend. Share this, like this. Let's spread the love and the light, and yeah, share the goodness. All right, that's it. Thank you.